Welcome to the Intentional Man Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Luttrell. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Intentional Man Podcast. Today we're talking about fear and what does a man do with fear? Is there anything wrong with being afraid? And when we find ourselves afraid, how do we handle that? So, Rusty, just getting right into it. When is a time that you are most afraid in life? Can you think of a time, even when maybe you were young, that you've been the most afraid that you can remember?
When I was young, I mean, it was, there's so many things, I remember having to go up to my room by myself and everything was dark, and it's like, oh, I've got to be really careful, like sneaking around the corners and looking into dark rooms, did you ever have that? Like, I can
Oh
remember going,
yeah, of
okay,
course.
I've got to just be brave,
Yeah,
and I mean, it's not like I was even home alone, but yeah, I remember, the unknown, I think, especially. Well, I think that's probably even true for people today, but definitely when you're
sure.
young, new experiences, things that you have kind of, make you a little afraid.
Yeah. Our house, the way it's built, is rather long. And the kids, if we're all on one side of the house, like on the bedrooms side, and they have to go all the way to the other side where the kitchen and laundry room and all that is, and they don't really like going, especially the younger ones, don't necessarily like going all the way to the other side of the house where no one is. So yeah, they can
Oh yeah.
definitely understand where you're coming from there.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's my youngest now still does the same thing. It was like, all right, go up and put this back in your room. Be like, I need you to come with me.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, we're right here. Go ahead.
yeah. We'll keep talking as you go. We'll stay in
Yeah,
voice contact.
that's right.
Man, I've got an easy one because this was a pretty frightening experience. When I would say 19-ish years old, this guy and I, as I've mentioned before, we grew up in Virginia, and there's a lot of caves in Virginia. And his friend I had at the time said that he knew where this cave was, about, an hour from the house, hour and a half from the house or so. And we decided to drive up there and check it out, just he and I. And so we got in the car. It was actually Sunday morning, which was my first mistake. I should have been going to church, but no, I decided to go
That's
check out
right.
this cave on a Sunday morning, right?
What you get for playing
So,
hooky.
yeah, exactly. The Lord taught me a lesson. But we drive up there and find the entrance to this cave, and nobody knew where we were. It wasn't a public cave. It wasn't, it's not somewhere you checked in and said, "Hey, we're going to be here." You basically kind of had to sneak up to it and get in. So went up to it, got in, walking around. It's really cool. It was a pretty neat experience at first, and then he had been there before, so I'm kind of following his lead, and he's like, "Okay, let's go through this passage." And in this particular passage, you were on your hands and knees crawling, and not just comfortably, but literally your back was up against the roof of that particular tunnel. And we're crawling through, and he has the light. He's in front of me. And again, I'm following him. And he says the words you never want to hear when you're, many feet underground and no one knows where you are. He says, "I think we've seen this place before." Like we had gone in a circle in this very narrow tunnel.
Oh,
And my goodness, man, even to this day, like this anxiety grips me. Like it was just the worst feeling.
oh
And
yeah.
I remember having to make myself not freak out, not start to hyperventilate because again, no one knows where we are. We're apparently lost. Like we just gone in a circle with our hands and knees. And I remember telling them, "Get us out of here." I mean,
Yeah.
I was, I was scared
Oh
because
yeah, I
I
can
mean, again,
imagine.
if you're in the dark, I mean, it was a very scary experience. So obviously, as I'm doing this podcast, we made it out safely, but it was, so
Yeah.
finally was able to navigate out and the rest of the time was fine. But man, I tell you, that was a scary time because we just, I think how it is with fear, we what makes us afraid, part of it, and we'll talk about in a little bit, is the fact that we're not in control. We cannot do anything to change our circumstances, and that's scary when we know that, hey, there's nothing I can do in this situation to make a difference necessarily. So that's my example, and that has stuck with me for many years, and I've used it on many occasions as examples for different things. But
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Have you been
so
back
I
into
am,
caves?
huh?
Have you been back into caves since
Oh
then?
yeah,
Like, you
yeah.
know,
Well, not anything like that where no one knew where we were, but it didn't
right.
turn me off to caves in general. I think they're awesome. We've
What is that? There's a term for that, isn't there? Like those cave explorers. It's not spelunking, right? I mean, because
No, it
that's
is spelunking. That's
is that
cave.
it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
When you're
gotcha. Yeah,
basically exploring caves, I think spelunking is referring to possibly rappelling down into them.
yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah, I thought that was
Yeah,
kind of more of yeah. You had like yeah, kind of like you were rappelling, maybe going up, down, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've seen a few of the shows like that. Like that there is no chance. Like I'm not claustrophobic and I'm not scared of like walking into a cave and seeing the stalagmites and stalactites and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually getting on your hands and knees and seeing some of those where they're like prone and crawling along, there is a 0% chance I would ever do that. Like that's
no.
what you experienced. It would probably be yeah, that would be a fear that I would just avoid altogether. Because yeah, I have zero desire to ever do that.
Yeah, at 19, I guess I didn't see that coming for whatever reason. Now, I
Yeah.
would have probably never even entered the tunnel. It's like, are you sure you know the way in, the way out? Are we going to make it?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
listened to some survival shows where, similar things happen. And I mean, again, I'm coming from where what I experienced, and it wasn't nearly as scary as what they've gone through. But hearing about how some people are caving and they're literally in a underground stream with their head just above water going through these passages, not knowing where it comes out. I'm like, you guys are,
Hmm.
I don't even want to say brave. You're stupid. No,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they know what
That's
they're doing. That's what they do.
I
But
guess, but
my goodness, man, yeah, yeah. So I went to Google and I went to see, what do people fear? So I typed in how to overcome fear of, and I let it autofill. What are some of the things that people are afraid of? Um, what do you think? Let me ask you. So what are some of the top things you think would show up if you Googled how to overcome fear of and left it blank?
oh wow.
What are people afraid
Loneliness.
of?
Yeah, I'm sure there, loneliness, fear of failure, kind of some of those things, financial insecurities. I'm guessing those would probably be, especially like loneliness or abandonment, stuff like that. It's got
Yeah,
to be at the
yeah.
top, right?
Uh, Interestingly, loneliness didn't come up in that particular list. I'm sure it's a huge one. The number one, I believe the first one that came up was failure, fear of
Hmm.
failure,
Yep.
rejection, fear of heights, fear of commitment, fear of being judged, and fear of confrontation. So those are the six that showed up when I Googled that. And obviously that's, you can say that makes sense. And again, like you said, fear of loneliness or abandonment would be a big one for people as well. And today we're talking about what makes men afraid. Not that these things don't, obviously. I think they all play a role in our lives. But specifically, what are some things that may make us afraid, and what does fear do to us as men? What's the result of fear in our lives if we don't deal with it? And then we're going to look at some ways to deal with it. What do we do when we find ourselves afraid? And how do we not just ignore that or think, hey, I'm a man, I can't be afraid, kind of, man your way through it or something. It goes beyond that. There's more needed. And think so. The first thing let's talk about is what happens when we're afraid? What do we find ourselves feeling? How do we react? And for me, again, I believe with the cave example, when I was afraid, there was this almost paralyzing type effect. Like, what do I do? We're down here. I don't know what to do. And again, called out to him, get us out of here, basically.
Yeah.
And fear can be very paralyzing, can't it?
Oh yeah, I know there's a mind-body connection, of course, to where when you start to have that fear that you can feel probably exactly what you have, that tightness, that almost pain in your chest, that you are feeling that fear and anxiety. And I think too, it's as we talk about fear, that there are so many synonyms for that. So when, we've got a man who's got a lot of machismo who says, well, I don't fear anything. It's like, well, but what if you look at some of the synonyms like trepidation, horror, panic, fright, terror, dread, dismay, apprehension, foreboding, consternation? Do you have any of those? I mean, if you're
Mhm.
human, the answer is, well, yes. So, yeah, it might use it under a different word or a different name, but certainly we all have fear in some form or fashion, whether it's a healthy fear of spiders and snakes or heights or close spaces like you have, kind of some of those just external fears or, fear, whether it's real or imagined. I think as men, we definitely have some. We fear or we are worried about our kids, sending them to school. You and I were talking about that before we started about, just kind of the world in which we live in and how it is scary sending your kids to school, no matter where you're sending them. I mean, that's something that I don't think is really out of place. That of course we worry about them. We want to protect them and keep them safe. And obviously with job markets, that's a real fear for us as well. So I think we have all kinds of, very real fears. Some of them maybe more so than others, but I think there's a lot of them that we need to understand and we need to know what to do with that fear as well.
Well, that's a good point because in the past podcast, we talked about how a lot of men struggle with processing different emotions, sadness,
Hmm.
anxiety, different things like that. And fear could be rolled into that as well. We're not sure how to process that. We haven't been taught how to process fear.
Yeah.
So, what do we tend to do as men? We roll everything into anger, right? So,
Yes.
a man who's afraid, a lot of times, what will happen is that'll be displayed as anger. He's afraid he's not maybe supplying adequately for his family. So, how does that look? He's angry. He's
Hmm.
always the angry dad, the angry husband. And it's not really because anything the family has done to him. It's because inside he's afraid he's not getting it right. And so you're absolutely right. We need to be able to process this emotion and realize, okay, what's behind my fear and how can I deal with this in a healthy manner?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that you can look at kids and probably, kind of as humans, as we have kind of changed, evolved over time, that it's kind of been that way. That for men and even like our little boys, it's okay if they are having those big emotions, if they are angry, if they're kind of being loud, if they are being aggressive. And I mean, as you know, but with little girls, it's almost like you don't want them to have those. You want them to, and it's okay for them to express the fear, kind of the more subtle emotions, the if they're crying and stuff like that, that it's okay for them to express that, but we don't want them to express the others. And boys, it's vice versa. It's almost, if they start crying, well, it's okay. Just stop. You're fine. I mean, we don't always let those emotions develop from a young age. It's a lot of times, especially older generations, that's what was modeled with our fathers, grandfathers, great grandfathers, that, you might have every now and again, but for the most part, they didn't express or explain how they were feeling when they were feeling sad, fearful, anxious. It's exactly like you said, it would come out maybe as anger or as just a quietness, not talking about it. And so it is very true that as we are aware of these emotions, that it's not healthy just to put them in a box or to not express them, to not talk about them, to not recognize them, for our own mental well-being and for those of us around or for those people that are around us as well to recognize, okay, this is why I am feeling this, or if I am angry, am I really angry at the situation or is it because I am fearful or anxious about
Hmm.
something else, so that we can then deal with them appropriately too and understand that having that fear, that it's not a bad thing, that fear in its fear can keep us out of some caves that we shouldn't go into. So, that's okay. That fear is not a bad emotion. It's funny, just not to get off on a side note, but I'm curious. I saw something in looking at this that said there's one school of thought that says fear is a sin. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Hmm.
And the reason was, I'll tell you, it said fear is a sin because that is not trusting God. And God, and Jesus has said he wants us to trust in him fully. So therefore, if
Yeah.
you're fearful, you're sinning.
Yeah, I think there's different types of fear. Number one, we're taught to fear God, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So that's that would contradict in some ways. And I know obviously people take the word fear when you talk about fearing God. So that means to honor him, to reverence him. Well, I agree that we should do those things as well. But when you see people come face to face with God or be in God's presence in the Bible, what they do, they basically
Yeah.
would beg for their life. They would pass out. They were very
Yeah.
afraid in his
Fall face
presence
down. Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
who he is. He
Yeah.
deserves not only our reverence, but it's a fear. The Bible says it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. So, is there a place for fear? Absolutely. And I also believe that when you get to the edge of a cliff, God's given us the reasonable nature to know, hey, I should be afraid of taking a step off of this cliff because of what it leads to.
Hmm.
It's not that I don't trust God. Yeah, sure, I trust God. He created this cliff, but He's also given me the common sense and sense of fear to know that, okay, this is a dangerous area for me to be in. Uh, so yeah, I don't believe at all that all fear is a sin. Now, where maybe they were going with that statement is fear a sin in the sense that we are not trusting God? Well, I was listening to some verses in a Bible story we were listening to on the way to school this morning, talking about Hezekiah and how in the beginning of his reign he had really turned his heart toward God. God blessed Judah, and they were becoming very prosperous and rich. And kind of maybe midway through his reign or so, he started to fade out. He started to trust more in his riches. And then the Assyrian king, he stopped paying tribute to that king. Well, they decided, hey, well, we need to go invade Judah and conquer that land. So as they're coming through all that territory, conquering peoples on the way there, Hezekiah gets shaken up, he starts to get fearful, and he reaches out to the king of Assyria, Sennacherib or something like that, some crazy name like that. And he says, "Hey, I'm sorry, I've changed my mind. I should have paid tribute. I'm sorry. How much do I owe you? Let me know what I need to pay you, and I'll have a check written."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly. Checks in the
basically,
mail.
yeah, exactly. And so anyway, he reacted out of fear. Is that sin? Yeah. In that circumstance, it was because what had happened is, Hezekiah was in a relationship with God, at least in the early years of his reign. Then he began to turn his back on him, kind of fade out, and then took matters in his own hands out of fear, where he should have been turning to God. And these were the days also where, they had prophets that they would go to and say, okay, what am I supposed to do? What does the Lord say? So rather than doing that, he didn't go to Isaiah and say, Isaiah, give me a word from the Lord. He's like, let me take care of this on my own. Let me figure this thing out. So I think that obviously makes a great point for us as men. That is so often how we react, isn't it? We
Mhm.
come to a situation that's difficult, and we may not even realize it's causing us fear, but it's causing us fear there because we're not processing that emotion, right? So
Right.
we get that I don't know, man, you name it. It's a very large bill that we didn't expect, or a job loss or something like that that can be a big problem. Immediately, for me, if something like that happens, immediately my gears start turning. Okay, how can I take care of this? What can I do? How do we set it aside? Whatever. You just start trying to figure it out on your own, just like Hezekiah did, where God is there, and it could even be something he's allowed to happen to prove himself to us. But when we turn the other direction and refuse to rely on God, or at least, even just pray about it, Lord, give me wisdom, maybe at that point, that's where it becomes sin. What do you
Yeah.
think? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. When I first read it, and actually listening to you, it kind of changed to where, yeah, I'm in agreement. Because when I first read it, I thought that is ridiculous. Like that makes no sense to say that fear is a sin. Because I think, again, that's one of those things that this is an emotion that God gave us, so there must be a reason
Sure.
for it.
Right.
Um, but I think just like when we were talking about temptation last week, I think it's what we do with it too. So I
Hmm.
think in general, is it fearful if I am worried about my kids going to school? Is it fearful if I am worried about, like you said, a big bill that's coming due or anything like that, or a direction of our family or country? I don't think that means that I'm not trusting God. It just means that I am aware of these things. And then maybe I bring them to Him in prayer and I then trust Him. I think if I continue to have anxiety over them, maybe that's starting to cross the line a bit. But I think in your example, I think for men especially, that we like to fix things. We
That's
like
right.
to, if
Yeah,
there's a problem, we want to fix it. And I think that's a lot of times where we fall short in that we don't stop and go, okay, fear. If I have a fear of some things, there's some things we can't fix. So therefore, if we can't directly fix it, we either ignore it or think it's, irrational, or therefore we don't need to deal with it. And I think as well too, if we do fix a problem or fix something, then maybe we start to lose the fear of God and thinking, well, I don't need him. I can do this. And
that's
I
right.
think
Yeah.
there, if we are not fearful, or if we are saying, what's the big deal? We're kind of losing that. Then I think again that's a sin, and not trusting God to handle everything, because as we've said many times, he already knows everything. He knows what we're going through. He knows what we're going to do with this. So yeah, I would agree with you though in those
Yeah.
points that you made. I think that was good.
Well, I think it also maybe boils down to the scripture that says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of might, and a sound mind. I think it's along those lines anyway, if I didn't get it perfectly. So are we operating in a spirit of fear where that may be considered sinful, or are we having a maybe a healthy realization of things we should avoid? If I see a tiger in the jungle, it's going to
Yeah,
spur some fear. Do I trust God? Absolutely. God, help me get up that tree. Well, I guess he'll follow me to the tree. Help me find
yeah.
somewhere where he can't go.
Find a
But
cave,
it's,
a
yeah,
narrow
exactly.
cave.
Yeah, I'm good at those. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, also using wild animals as an example, we were talking about how men are not able to always kind of process that fear and they turn it into anger. Corner a stray dog. What does
Mhm.
it do? It fights. It'll attack you because it's afraid. Same, with most wild animals, that's what happens. Most attacks on humans by wild animals is because the animal is fearful of the human, feels cornered, feels
Oh yeah,
threatened.
absolutely.
So, that's how we can be as men. But you pointed out a good, or you made a good point that I want to make sure we do cover is fear is a natural and necessary response. It's a protective response, but it's when that reaction is kind of out of proportion with what's happening where it can really become a problem for us. If we are constantly not just aware of dangerous situations or things that could happen so that we're able to prepare for them or process them, but we actually live our life in a way that is constantly fearful that everything we're fearful that there's going to be some negative outcome. We're fearful, your kids may be totally healthy, but you live in fear that they're going to get sick and have big problems, or just that in general. You may be doing wonderfully at your job and very successful in your career, but you live in fear that you're going to lose your job, and then what's going to happen to the family. Living kind of in a perpetual state of fear, that's a problem. So we need to make sure that we're not allowing fear to grip us and rule us, but also processing healthy fear in the right way, and ultimately, as you pointed out, we talked about bringing those things to God.
Yeah, I think when we are living in that state of fear, it's reducing God, reducing what God can do, and it's elevating our own state, our own opinion. If we
Hmm.
are living in that state of fear, not just, somebody we might say, oh, they're being paranoid about their job, about their kids, or anything like that. Not that, but, constantly fearful of what's around the corner, then we are not living a life of faith, because there's things like that, as I heard one time, and I find it to be very, very true. We can be so worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, and it ruins today. Well, if something bad happens tomorrow, can we change it? Of course, we're told no, we can't change, the hair on our head by worrying about it. So why then are we going to worry about tomorrow, what may or may not come, and have that ruin today? Because it's not going to change tomorrow. So why not, as we are told, to live each day to its fullest, to embrace today, to enjoy today, and to give praise and thanks to God, and know no matter if the bad thing comes tomorrow, God's got me. I'm okay. We're somehow going to get through it. And if nothing comes, great. Praise be to God anyway. So I think there's a lot of discipline and a lot of growth that we have to be able to say, no matter what, whether it's good or bad, I'm still going to trust him. And that's not going to change my faith. That's not going to change the reliance that I have on him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and you already mentioned some of these, but some of the things that men are afraid of in general. Let's point some of these out. So as guys are listening, maybe they can identify with some of these things that we're talking about. Number one, men can have a fear of failure in their career. You mentioned that. In their
Mhm.
finances, we can have a fear of failure in our parenting, right? Am I doing a good job with my kids? And that's something I tend to ask myself often. Am I doing am I really doing this right?
Mhm.
And can be a little fearful that I'm getting it wrong sometimes. And what's that going to look like down the road for my kids? And the last one that I noted here was a fear just in general of a lack of success. Am I a successful man? Not just in my career, not just in parenting, but in general. Am I succeeding in life? Am I living it in a way that at the end of it, I'm going to look back and be generally happy with what I was able to do with what God gave me? Is there anything else that you would add to that?
I would add too, in terms of our relationship with our wife, or if we are not
Sure.
married. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's certainly not as stereotyped or as generalized with men versus women that that you hear all the time about women get to a certain age and they have anxiety about not being married or something like that. Some do, some don't. I think the same is true for men as well, though. To where you have some who are okay, as Paul said, that it's okay if you are a bachelor, but some have anxiety and fear about that if they're ever going to find a partner. And then, of course, if you are married, well, are you going to be able to be a good husband? Are you going to be able to fulfill your wife's needs in terms of a partnership, in being her
Hmm.
partner, so you might have fear about that as well. So I think, yeah, really anything that we kind of come in contact, real or imagined, I think we can be fearful of it. And certainly, I think you hit on some of the bigger, broader topics, but I think that it's almost innumerable the number of things that we can be fearful of.
Sure. And I think it's interesting too that even very successful people can be fearful. It's not
Oh
just
yeah.
something that a man that you may consider weak is guilty of or prone to. Very successful people, people who've accomplished big goals, can find themselves fearful. And I think about Elijah as an example. And you think about what he had experienced when you remember when he had built the altar and he challenged the worshipers of Baal and all the priests to build an altar as well. And okay,
Mhm.
whoever's God answers by fire, that's the true God. And the worshipers of Baal and the priests, they build their altar, they worship, or they slaughter the calf, and they're dancing around, they're calling on their God. Nothing's happening. They're going nuts, screaming, cutting themselves, all this stuff. Nothing happens. Elijah's just kind of kicked back, making jokes. He's like, maybe your God's sleeping. Maybe he's in the
Yeah, yeah.
bathroom. I mean, it's hilarious, right? He's kind of
Yeah.
funny. And so finally, he's like, all right, enough. My turn, right? And he takes, I believe it's the 12 stones. He basically builds the altar as it was supposed to be built and digs a trench around it, fills it with water, puts the sacrifice on the water or the wood on the altar, the sacrifice on the wood, drenches that with water. Then he prays to God, simple prayer. Fire falls from heaven, consumes the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, consumes the water. I mean, it's just fabulous, right? And
Drops the
then he
mic.
Huh? Yeah, exactly.
Drops his mic.
He drops all the priests, that's for sure.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
they yeah, they didn't live long after that. But what happens, man, just a few chapters maybe later, we see he's on the run because the evil queen said if Elijah is not as one of those priests by the end of the day or something like that, then then I'll die or something. I don't know. But anyway, his life is threatened, so he's on the run and he's fearful. And it's just, looking at it from now from our perspective, like Elijah, dude, you just saw something miraculous happen. Why would you be afraid? If God can do that, don't you know he could take care of this evil queen, and protect you? But that's the way we can be, isn't it? whenever we take our eyes off of God, very similar to what happened with Peter walking on the water, Peter got out of the boat and actually started walking towards Jesus. But when he took his eyes off of God, off of Jesus, he started to sink. He got afraid. It says that he looked at the waves, got afraid, and started to sink. And that's what can happen to us. We can experience great things. And I think sometimes maybe it happens because we do experience great things. It's like, wow, God's really moving. Look at all this happening. I am rolling. God is really opening doors and blessing our family. And then something negative comes and we don't expect. It's like, wait a minute, this doesn't look like blessing. So then we get fearful. What if I lose it all? What happens? How am I going to handle this? And we take our eyes off God and we start to sink or we start to run for our life, right? And maybe that goes back to your point about when's it become sin? Maybe that's it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking of another Old Testament story that it's the exact same thing, essentially, is when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. He parts the Red Sea, they go across, I mean, can you imagine the awe of seeing that, and even some of the different movies that have attempted to do it, even seeing it that, and it's like, oh, wow. But to actually be there and to do that and to be let out of bondage, you're no longer a slave, you're going to the promised land and you start to wander for a little bit and you start, woe is me, take us back to Egypt, at least there,
Yeah,
we had a place, it's like, how do you just forget what you just came through? And I think it's something that, a lot of times now it's called the mountaintop experience. I think we have all of these seminal moments in our life, these amazing moments we go, wow, look at what I came
yeah,
through. Look
yeah.
at what God led me through. Look at what God did. And yet, yeah, a very short time later, we're, over there, woe is me, take me
Yeah.
back, I'm so,
Where are you,
it's,
God? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that we definitely have those
sure
moments,
we
and I
do.
think that's when we have the fear, and we again have to go back and remind us or remind ourselves about, oh yeah, yeah, I've been through this. So why would this be so insurmountable? Is one of our favorite phrases in my house is like, what can't God do?
Hmm.
Really, what can't he do? And it's something though, I mean, I am not a fan of mantras or slogans, or anything like that. Yet sometimes we have to have, I think, some of those things that we remind ourselves of. So when we have fear, or whether we recognize it as fear or not, whether it's anxiety or trepidation, whatever one of those other synonyms we want to call it, but that we go back and we remember it, we recognize exactly what this is and why we're having it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's important for us to remember that we can overcome fear if we're viewing these things from the right perspective. Now, obviously, there are psychological issues that people may have to work through. We're just in this episode, in this show, we're talking about basic fear not related to mental health, just, basic things
Exactly.
that
Yep.
we're could be afraid of. And so how do we do that? How do we deal with fear when it comes our way? And went back to my trusty Google search, and it now spits out the AI results, which is handy because it gives me a full list
Yes.
without having to go to a bunch of websites. I'm just going to read some of them because a lot of them were pretty good. Um, if you find yourself generally fearful, the first recommendation is identify your fears. What are you afraid of, and what's the negative outcome you're expecting to happen? So if you are, let's take our career as an example again and say, okay, if you are in a job and you're doing your job, you're doing well, the company's doing well, yet you still find yourself afraid that you're going to lose your job. What's at the root of that? What's causing that fear? What do you see in your mind when you imagine this? How do you imagine that even happening? Like if you're constantly getting good feedback from your boss or the owner and the company's doing well, why are you afraid of that? Is it a well-founded fear, or is it just something that you allow to roll around in your head? And that's an important thing for us as men to realize is number one, just because we have a thought doesn't mean we have to own it. We don't have to say, this is true, this is mine. If we find ourselves fearful of something that really has no substance to it, then sometimes we just need to recognize that and say, hey, this doesn't even make sense. I don't need to be fearful of this. I've got a good relationship with my coworkers, my boss, the company's doing well. There's really no reason for me to even have this fear. Even aside from the fact that we're relying on God in the first place, like if the Lord does close that door, if something does change, then He loves us. He's going to provide for us somehow. Um, so number one, identify the fear and see kind of what's behind it. Is it well founded? Another one that I liked is it talks about reframing failure. Since so many of our fears as men center around a failure in some regard, maybe reframe what failure looks like. What do we consider failure? So if we're starting a new diet, as an example, we always go to a handful of examples. You're
Right.
starting a new
Yeah.
diet, and as you begin, you're in the back of your mind, you're afraid you're going to quit. You're going to fail at this diet or this new way of life. I don't want to say diet, this new way of eating, this new health goal that you have. Well, okay, so what does failure look like? Does failure look like, okay, I ate a cookie this evening and I shouldn't have, that was against my diet? Is that failure or is that just made a mistake, jump back on the horse and keep riding, right? Keep going forward. But reframing that, not thinking, okay, just because I ate this cookie, I have failed and now I'll quit. It's okay, let's see what failure really is. Failure is quitting. If your goal is to have this new healthy lifestyle, a mistake is not failure. Failure is quitting the lifestyle. So reframing that and understanding it, and then even to some degree, they say this, and you already know this, not being afraid to fail. Some of the best companies out there encourage failure because they know through failure their employees and the company in general learns what doesn't work, but also what does work and where there needs to be improvements and where it needs to be made stronger. So as men, if we can reframe our idea of failure, it can help us a lot. It can help us not to fear failure. It's like, I'll go back to parenting again. If I'm always afraid that I'm not going to be a good dad and I'm going to fail at being a dad, then that's going to make me not be a good dad because I'm going to operate under fear, and that's not a good place to come from. But if I recognize areas of failure in my life and say, okay, yep, I'm not good at this, or in this area, I really need some work. I'm not really succeeding here. Well, those may be momentary failures, and I can use those though and say, okay, well, what's this pointing out? Where's my weakness? Where can I improve? Where can I get some better education so that I can be better in this area and become a better dad or a better husband or even, a better employee, however it applies to you. But reframing our idea of failure so that it's not a fear, it's actually, in some ways, it's even a benefit.
We talked about it on a different podcast that we can't be afraid, fearful, to let our children fail.
Right.
That so
Hmm.
often we are. We don't want them to. That's kind of our nature. We want to prop them up. We want them to have success. We want them to succeed in everything that they do. But that's not necessarily the best thing for their development because there's going to come a time when they do fail. And, like with baseball, our youngest is playing baseball for the first time for coach pitch. Well, how many times of like, well, I don't want him to strike out. I want him to have success. Well, he can't stand up there for 32 pitches, if that's what it takes. No, there's a little different because after 6 pitches, he gets to hit off the tee. But still, if I was, oh, no, 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 in this league, they get up there and they're going to just keep on swinging away. Well, that's not really accurate because if he doesn't have success, then hopefully that will stir up something in him to make him want to practice more to where he does hit the
Sure.
ball. So I think we can be driven to succeed when we do have those failures. So I think that is okay. It's okay to recognize that we have that fear, that they might have a fear of failure, but that they have to be able to overcome them. And to a couple of your earlier points too, I think there's times to where, let's say instead of the diet example, I will go with we'll look to the 18 to 34 demographic, which sadly you and I are no longer in. But when you're kind
Speak
of
for
starting up,
yourself.
yeah, well,
I might
thou
be.
speak with forked tongue, sir.
Yeah.
But if you're getting ready to say ask someone out on a date, that you're
Mm.
looking for, and you go, oh man, if you're paralyzed by fear, well, Yes, but what if you just kind of play that out? And this could be a date. This could be any situation, kind of where we are now. Kind of if I need to go in and ask for a promotion, or if I need to do anything else. Well, let's play that fear out, kind of play out the string. What's going to happen if I don't succeed, and kind of work through it and go, okay, so to the date example, she says no, she doesn't want to grab coffee or, go out. Okay, I might be a little down, a little embarrassed about that. That's too bad. But what if she says yes? What's the flip side to this? Am I willing to take that risk? So sometimes I think we can get through our fears if we actually play it out. Kind of, okay, best case, worst case scenario. And okay, the worst case, it's really not that bad. I'm okay with it. This fear that I'm having is irrational. I believe it was a psychologist one time who said, a lot of times our brains, they tell us so many things because our brain just wants to survive. That is all our
Mm.
brain wants to do. So there's times where we have these kind of fearful thoughts that pop into our mind, and we have to go, thank you, brain. Now shut up. Yes, I
Yeah,
recognize what you
yeah,
said. I understand you're trying to keep me safe. I think that's a lot of what fear, our natural fear is. It's trying to protect
sure.
ourselves,
Yeah,
from doing something. And sometimes, as you said, it's very rational fear. When you're on the edge of the cliff looking over, you go, no, maybe I should back up. But if this is fear of something that is what we would say is
a
irrational, or fear that can
commitment
be
or something like
overcome,
that.
yeah, something like that, then we go, all right, you know what? This is completely irrational, to where, you're contemplating asking someone out, and suddenly you're spiraling to, you're living the life of a miser when you're 50 years old. Like, wait a minute, how did you get from there one point to another? It's like, relax, brain, I got this. I
Yeah,
acknowledge what you're
yeah,
saying, but in this case, go away. I'm good.
yeah. Yeah. You like you said, you have two options. You can ask her out. She says yes, or she says no, and you go along and somebody else comes along. Or you ask her out, she says yes, and 24 years later, you're married and you've got five kids like me. So
Exactly.
it can go one of
Exactly.
two ways. It worked out well for me, But
That's right.
yeah, it is right though. There's sometimes our brain is gonna to get in the way. We obviously need to think things through and be reasonable. But we also need to make sure that the things we are entertaining in our minds, the thoughts that we're entertaining, are, I mean, obviously number one, pleasing to God, but also that they do make sense. Because our brain will, man, sometimes, especially if you sit there and stew on something, you will end up like you said. I mean, you'll go through an entire lifetime of, okay, here's the end result. It's like, man, how did I get here? How did that even happen? But some people live their life that way. They live in constant
Mhm.
fear because they
Yeah.
believe, that the worst is going to happen to them. So we went through some basic things that Google will spit out, and you can check these out yourself online, different websites that share different things that we can do to help us overcome fear or deal with fear. But as Christian men, we also need to remember that we aren't in this alone. Romans 8:15 says, "The spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father." So when we came into our relationship with Jesus Christ and now are considered family, we're considered sons. We have someone, the creator of this universe, walking through this life with us. And I think of it as, take skydiving as an example. That's something that I've never been before. So that would be a pretty scary experience stepping off the plane the first time. I think I would probably do it, but it would be a little frightening. You want to make sure, well, I sure hope this parachute was packed right, and I hope everything goes well, and I
Yeah.
hope I know how to control it to get to where I'm supposed to be and not end up in a tree or power line. But
Mm.
so that's kind of the scenario where you're on your own. But a lot of people will, at least on the first few, they'll do what's called tandem skydiving, where they're
Mhm.
connected to someone who is a professional, who's had hundreds, maybe thousands of jumps under their belt, and they know exactly what to do. They know the parachute's packed well. They know what to do, even in an emergency situation. If something doesn't open, they got the backup chute. They just know. So as you step out of that plane, knowing you're strapped to this professional, it gives you a sense of maybe more peace. You may still have a little fear because you're still stepping into the unknown, if you will, but now you're doing it with someone who has done this many times before. And that's how it is in my mind with our relationship with Jesus. You know, we're still going to be stepping out into unknowns. There's still going to be things we can't control, things that come up that we weren't expecting, stuff that would typically make us fearful. But if we really have that relationship with Jesus, then we can approach it from a different perspective. It's like, yeah, I don't know, but he does. You know, it's kind of like the old cartoons where you would see like a little, mouse or whatever standing in front of the cat, and there's somebody behind the mouse, and the mouse thinks he's the one scaring off the
Right.
attacker, or something like that. And it's similar. It's like, yeah, I can't fight it, or I can't figure it out, or it's bigger than me, but not bigger than my God. And he's right here with me, and that's a perspective that I'm not saying it's always easy, because it's not like we have the physical, we see him standing with us physically, but that is the importance of relationship. I mean, there's just a difference, man. There's a difference in just Sunday morning, going to church, singing the songs, going back home and doing your regular life the rest of the week. There's a difference between that and going to church Sunday morning, singing the songs, and then going home and still continuing that relationship with the Lord, where we're praying, we're reading our Bible, we're aware of His presence in our lives, man. Because whenever we have that, it's it's reassuring. It's more real to us. It, just like any physical relationship here. If you and I are friends, yet I only talk to you on, Sunday morning, and I'm glad to see you, but all through the week I don't talk to you, I don't see you. It's just a 1 hour a week deal. I might still say, yeah, I know Rusty. He's a great guy, and I can even name some stuff about you, maybe your favorite sport, what you drive, all that stuff. But I don't have a real relationship with you where I knew if I called you, you'd be there if I really needed you. Because it's like, yeah, well, we don't really have that relationship. You could probably think of lots
Mhm.
of people in your life like that right now. I was like, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, but I don't know that I could call them at 2 o'clock in the morning and they would be there if I needed them. Of course, I don't know if you would do that so much at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Well,
but I know I would have your good thoughts and vibes.
that's yeah, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and
Yeah,
prayers. Yes.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
But uh,
yes.
but we have that. So it's not just knowing God is able, it's trusting that He will. It's not just knowing scripture. It's believing that they apply to us, not just knowing things about God. It's knowing that He is in a relationship with me and I with Him.
There is such a difference in knowing God. And of course, there's that bumper sticker I keep thinking about too, that's got, the different spellings of no, about like no God, no peace, no
Oh yeah,
God,
right.
no peace. But there is a lot of truth for that, or to that, because it is so true in that there is a peace which passes through all understanding when we know God, when we have that relationship with Him, to actually have a peace that we can't always understand, that we can't make logical
Hmm.
sense of it, but to know in the middle of the storm, I am calm and I am peaceful because I
Yeah.
know who's got me. I think there's times too, I'm thinking about, when you've got a little child in like a pool or in a body of water, with a parent, and the little kid doesn't know how to swim yet. And sometimes he's just clinging to his parents and got the biggest smile on his or her face, kind of bobbing up and down, just enjoying it, clinging. And then there's other times to where maybe it's the first time or the water's a little cold, and there's just this look of fright and this absolute clinging, to the parent. And yet the parent, for the most part, has always kind of got the same, kind of, it's okay, I got you, you're okay here. Let's either enjoy this moment together or have no fear because I'm here with you. I've got you. I think as we get older as adults, that still holds true, that there are times when everything is going along and we're happy, and we should enjoy this moment with our maker, with God, knowing, yes, He still got me and I'm clinging, here to Him. I'm not thinking that I'm swimming on my own. There's no illusion with that child who thinks, oh yes, I'm doing this beautiful breaststroke, going around this pond here on my own. No, they still know that they have safety and comfort because of who they are clinging to. In the same time, when we are going through moments that make us fearful, that we're unsure of, that we are feeling overcome with fear, we know who we can grip to even tighter, and that can then take away those fears. Because I think that's the important part, is not just having the fear, acknowledging that, but then what do we do with it? How do we work through it? Not just saying, okay, I'm fearful. Great. I know I'm fearful, and I even know where it's coming from. Well, just stopping there is kind of like stopping midway through your sentence. You're kind of waiting for the conclusion of what you're going to say. So just getting up to that precipice does us no good. It's what we do afterward that really matters, right?
Yeah, it is. So how do we get better at that?
Hmm.
At actually
Well,
trusting?
yeah, I'll tell you one of my favorite verses that is often overlooked, and actually my wife brought it to my attention, about a year and a half or so ago, and it's one of those verses that, since I know you have got, pretty much, beginning to end memorized, including the maps and concordance and everything. This will not surprise you, but it's one of those that gets often overlooked, and it's one of those that go, wait a minute, really? How have I overlooked this verse? Like, I absolutely love it. How have I not heard this preached more often, or gone to? But it's in Psalm 34:4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. It's one of those that I think is perfect in a lot of ways in the very beginning. I sought the Lord. We have talked
Hmm.
many times about praying, about meditating, being mindful, and there is, of course, validity to that. It is necessary. That is part of it. But that is not just kind of, or this verse, I don't think is just saying you can just sit back and passively wait for the Lord. It's like, just sit still, be calm and still. I know that I know there's that verse as well, of course. But this to me is more action. It is more taking place. Okay, what can I do to go and to know the Lord? Is it listening to very knowledgeable individuals on a podcast? Is it, seeking out different devotionals, or listening to a my favorite pastor? What can I do to
Hmm.
actively seek out the Lord? What can I do to seek him so that I will then have this peace, so that he will take away my fears?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It brings to mind when you say, I love that scripture. When I sought the Lord, it reminded me of when the parable that Jesus shared of the woman who was trying to find the gold coin in her
Mhm.
house. And she was, looking everywhere, sweeping the house everywhere, and she, being diligent in finding this coin. And she rejoiced when she found it. She was seeking it though, and I think
Mhm.
sometimes we may give a cursory prayer to the Lord. Lord, provide my needs today, or help me not to be afraid. But do we really seek the Lord? Do we really, sometimes maybe on our face, man? I mean, really, really wanting to hear and saying, God, I need to hear from you today. I need to know what I'm supposed to do here, or I need to know how to make it through the situation because I'm afraid, Lord, and it's
Mhm.
okay to share that. The Lord doesn't, I mean, like you said earlier in the podcast, he already knows. It's not like it's a surprise to him. So, just kind of laying it bare with the Lord, saying, I'm afraid. I'm not sure what to do. This is pretty scary. I need you to help me one way or the other.
Mhm.
And like I said before, though, knowing that he is there and hearing us and that we're in a relationship with him, if we believe that, if we trust in that, then the Lord, I mean, he does move on our behalf. Now, it may not always look how we want it to look. It doesn't mean all of a sudden everything disappears, like the wave of a wand and it's gone, but it's
Mhm.
the Lord moves. And it may just be simply creating a peace within us as we go through the rest of the situation, not knowing what the answer will be necessarily, but the peace is there. And it's like I believe you said also, it gives us a peace that passes all understanding. There was a
Mhm.
picture that I remember seeing years ago. Yeah, I've seen it multiple times, but the first time was years ago, where it was this raging waterfall, and it was this bird's nest with a bird in it right by the waterfall. And then it was another picture of just a calm environment with I think a bird in a nest in that one as well. So which one is really experiencing peace? And it was the one by the raging waterfall. It even in the midst of the waterfall, it knew it was safe in its nest. And we can experience that type of peace. in the middle of what could be a very fearful situation, we can know that, hey, yep, it's raging around me, but I know my creator. I know who I'm in a relationship with, and I know that my God is here right with me. And again, it's just comforting. And it's something that the world doesn't have. Not that the world can't accept Jesus and someone in the world can't accept Jesus and then have that relationship with him. But for those who have not accepted Jesus, they don't have that as a resource. They literally have to figure it out. And they may do that themselves, or they may do it by bringing in other people, which is can still be part of how we operate as Christians. We need maybe other people's input or other people's help, but ultimately we know that our true help comes from the Lord.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there goes to the second part of the verse and something that we don't want to gloss over about he delivered me from all my fears. Doesn't say that he delivered me from all of my problems, from all
That's
of
right.
my situations, as you said. So there is no magic wand, there is no magic prayer to where we pray this and all of a sudden, our troubles are gone. That is not at all what this verse is saying. There's nothing that says that that will be the case because obviously, as we know, Jesus said, in this life you will have troubles. What it is saying
Mm-hmm.
is we should not be fearful about them. Doesn't mean that our circumstance will necessarily change or improve right away, but it means that we shouldn't be fearful. We should be able to face it with confidence, with it, that's what's going to be taken away is our fear, not necessarily the situation that we find ourselves in. I think there's a lot of people or Christians who a lot of times have gone astray or have had some misguided anger because they prayed about something and the situation didn't change, and
Mm-hmm.
some horrible instances too, with deaths and things like that, maybe it's hard for us to make sense of, maybe it's hard for us to comprehend, and there's things that we just can't. And so it's not saying that any of those things suddenly are going to magically get better or disappear, but it is saying that we will no longer have to have fear about the situation.
Right. So wrapping up then, we know that as men, we're going to experience things that cause fear. And one of the first things we need to do is, well, possibly one of the first things we need to do is actually identify fear and not let it be, not let it come out as anger or some other emotion, but identify, hey, yeah, this is making me fearful in some way. Maybe not afraid like a child, but it's I'm worried about this. I'm fearful that this could happen. So identifying that we have fear, then identifying what's making us afraid, and say, okay, is this something that's real? Should I be afraid of this? And then processing it from there. What can I do to overcome this fear? Is there something that I need to change? Or is it just something I need to bring others in my life into, or something I need to trust God more about, but not living a life of fear? What do we do with our fear? We have to handle it. You know, the As men, we do need to step up and deal with it. We can't just let it be part of our life forever. And if that means, guys, if it means that you need to get some professional help, do it. I mean, a pastor, a counselor, some type of professional. Sometimes we need those people to help us just walk through what's happening, to help us kind of lay out our thought processes and guide us through the process of getting over certain fears. But sometimes there's things that we just need to look and say, yeah, I'm not supposed to be afraid here. I don't need to be unnecessarily afraid of these things or of this happening, because it really isn't. First of all, it may not be likely, or it's not maybe even something I can control. So, I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. Let me live today and please God with the time that I've got today.
Yeah, it's well said. There's times that where we need to not just ignore it, put it in a box, or think that we can handle it, or just muscle our way through it. That we need to actually express it, get it out. And if it is talking to a professional who is not going to judge us one bit, but actually gives us some tools and steps and protocols to be able to handle it, then all the better. Why would we not do that?
Right. So on the way out today, Rusty, if you will, let's read that scripture again that you shared just a little bit ago.
Sure, it's from
Read
Psalm
that one,
34:4.
and that'll wrap us up. Okay.
So I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from all my fears.
Amen. Guys, have a great week. We look forward to next time. God bless you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Intentional Man Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow us, give us a 5-star rating, and share the podcast with a man you think may enjoy it. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at theintentionalmanpodcast@mintentional.org. For more information about our show topics, visit us online at www.mintentional.org. We hope you have a great week, and remember guys, choose to be intentional.